recap that, but let's be very aware of what else comes up. So there are 4 things you need to know about conformity. Do you guys need paper, or are you okay? Yeah? Okay. 4 key areas of conformity. This is types of conformity, explanations for conformity, variables that affect conformity, and conformity to social roles. Yeah? So, types of conformity. Your first type of conformity is compliance. This is a type of conformity. It is when you publicly, but don't privately, go along with the majority group, notice, to gain approval or avoid disapproval. In other words, you want to be seen to behave in a certain way to fit in with the group. You need an example. So an example of that would be cheering along at a football match when actually, privately, you don't actually support a football team. Okay? The next type is identification. This is when we do both privately and publicly accept the majority influence, but we do so for a very specific reason, often because we want to be in that group, or it's just situation specific. So we behave that way publicly and privately in that situation only. What's a great example of this? Army personnel staff returning, when they're out on the front line, they're going to behave and think like a soldier. They identify. When they return, they probably don't identify and think like a soldier in the situations once they're out of that context. Okay? Finally, internalisation. This is true conformity. This is our strongest type of conformity. It is when we both truly publicly and privately accept the group norms and we adopt that belief system in every area of our life. Brilliant example of this, it came up in your mock, is religion. Now don't just put religion, say what about religion, adopting a belief system, a religious belief system in all areas of your life, or perhaps changing from a Buddhist to a Christian. You are totally re-adopting a total new set of beliefs. Make sure you have a very clear example for each of those types. Now what do we then move on to next? Explanations. The 3 we've just covered are 3 types of conformity, but what might explain why people conform in those 3 different ways? And there are 2 explanations that you need to know. The first is informational social influence, ISI. The best definition is that it is a motivational force, a motivational desire to look to others to be correct. In other words, you're looking for information. You want to know how is the correct way to behave. This explanation most closely explains internalisation. It most closely explains one of the types, that is internalisation. And we see ISI being the explanation for conformity in most situations when they are new or we are uncertain about something. So like your first day at a new job, you're going to watch how others do things to make sure that you are learning what is the correct way of doing things at work. Okay? NSI is your second explanation. Okay? It's a motivational force to be liked, to be accepted. Yeah? And this most closely explains compliance. Okay? It's an explanation for why we might publicly but not privately conform. And this most likely explains conformity in familiar, unambiguous situations. Yeah? So we could be at our first day at work and we've noticed that everybody's wearing a certain type of clothing, and we wear the same clothes the next day, not because we think that's the right thing to do, but because we want to fit in with our new gang at work. Yeah? So it can be the same behaviour, but the motivation behind it can be ISI or NSI. Okay, your main study that you need to know, which links directly to NSI, is Ash's conformity study. Okay, here are some key features that you just need to know about the method of Ash's study. There were 123 male participants, and each one of them was put into a group of 7 to 9 Confederates. And they were asked to judge the length of a line. Is this stimulus line a match to A, B, or C? Now, on critical trials, the Confederates gave the identical wrong and very obviously incorrect answer. And the naive, the true participant, all 123 of them, had to give their answer last. They were positioned last in the line to give their answer, having just heard all the other Confederates say an obviously incorrect response. And there was a control group which individually tested participants, true naive participants, on the line judging to test whether the task was easy or not. Okay, what are the key findings you need to know about ASH? There was a 0.04 error rate in the control group. Make sure you tell your examiner that and you tell them why that's important. What does that confirm? That the task is easy. Most importantly, what do we see in the experimental group? In other words, the conditions where we've got one naive participant with 7 to 9 Confederates. We see on average 32% conformity to the wrong answer. That is the most critical percentage you need to remember. By all means, make an effort to remember the other two. 75 of the 1, 2, 3 participants conformed at least once, and 5% conformed to all the wrong answers, but 32% conformed on average. Post-experiment debriefs, this counts as critical results. Don't forget this. In the debrief, participants consistently said, I didn't want to look stupid. What does that evidence suggest and confirm? That clearly we are seeing evidence that the motivational force to why they answered incorrectly was because they didn't want to look stupid. They wanted to be accepted. In other words, NSI was driving their conformity, and the type of conformity is compliance. Okay, in evaluation, 2 critical evaluation points that are going to guarantee you top mark AO3 in the exam if this comes up. We don't like ASH's study because it's unrealistic. It's judging lines. We know that what this means is that it lacks mundane realism. Push your response. Say why and show that you understand what mundane realism is. Would we really expect the group to really disagree so much as to what was a correct line in real life? Would we really expect people to be put in situations of judging lines in real life? No. As a result of that, as a consequence of that, we can suggest the study lacks ecological validity. In other words, push your argument forward. This is what's going to get you the marks. We have limited confidence in generalising ASH's findings to real-life conformity situations. It is that sentence, psychologists, that's going to get you the mark. Just saying this will not. 2 other key AO3 points I think you should be confident discussing with ASH is that it was unethical. You know the line of the story here. There was deception. Participants were told it was a study of perception. They were lied to. This means there is no informed consent and puts participants at a higher risk of psychological harm. Push it, push it, push it, give an example, otherwise you're not going to get the mark. Disagreeing with others when knowing that they were saying the wrong thing could have made them feel uncomfortable, could have made the participants feel stressed. That's really important. That's what's going to get you the mark. And finally, demand characteristics. We know what this is now. We're well equipped with research methods. And in ASH's case, given ASH's specific example, essentially the Confederates were not trained actors and therefore could have given signs that this was a setup, and the participants might have realised and pretended to conform. That is the content you need to get in there if you're going to use demand characteristics as an AO3. Okay, moving on to variables which affect conformity. We have 3 of them. We have group size, and ultimately you need to be able to offer a variation of ASH's study to confirm that. We know that with 1 Confederate we see no conformity, with 2 we see 13%, and with 3 Confederates we see 32%. In other words, as the group gets bigger, conformity increases, but it stops at around 3 Confederates. Yeah, it kind of levels out. So actually ASH didn't really need to use 7 to 9 in each group because he would have found the same effect with only 3 Confederates. So long as there is a small majority, it works. Okay? Our second one is unanimity. Essentially, this is when we see 1 Confederate in that group disagreeing with the rest. Doesn't have to even be the correct answer, just a different answer, one other person in that group. So by the time we get round to that last naive participant who's waiting to give their answer, they've just seen one other person go against the group, their confidence to reject the majority is increased, and therefore we are more likely to see that naive participant rejecting the majority. So when there is not unanimous decision in the group, when there is one person that goes against the group, conformity decreases. And last but not least, task difficulty. So when Ash moved his lines closer together and the task became a bit harder, we saw that conformity increased. And actually what do we see happening here is that it's no longer possibly NSI that's explaining the finding, it is ISI. The naive participants were starting to conform more with the rest of the group, not because they wanted to fit in, not because they wanted to be accepted, but because they thought, actually, they might be right, because I'm finding this task more difficult. This is critical information if you get a question that asks you to discuss and evaluate NSI and ISI's two explanations, because it's this point that enables you to say that you can move between one and the other. Okay? Okay, and finally, we did start a few minutes late. If anyone needs to rush the rehearsal, they can, but I promise you it's 2 minutes and we're done. Zimbardo is a participant observation method. Okay, this is conformity to social roles. We have a sample size of 75 male students. It was a volunteer sample. They responded to a newspaper ad, and there was random allocation of roles. The one thing you need to take away is that Zimbardo's method was the process of dehumanisation. That is Zimbardo's method. He stripped participants of their identity. Give examples. He gave the guards glasses, he gave them uniforms, and he gave prisoners ID numbers. And he took part in the study himself. I've highlighted dehumanisation because it is the term you need to know and you need to use when you discuss Zimbardo's methodology. What did he find? He found de-individuation. This is Zimbardo's finding. This is a lowering of self-awareness, a weaker sense of responsibility. Give examples. For example, prisoners referring to themselves as their own ID numbers. Okay. Fits of rage. Zimbardo had to finish the study early, and he noticed increasing aggressive nature of the guards. In post-experiment interviews, he found that they were incredibly surprised by their behaviour. In other words, we do see conformity to new social identities, even when they make us go against our own moral code. Two main themes to evaluate Zimbardo on ethics. You know the first one, we've just covered it for Ash. The second critical one is here. Blame Zimbardo for using an extreme stress methodology. Dehumanisation is horrible. It is putting a participant into an extremely stressful situation and knowing that you've done that. For example, stripping them of their clothes and putting them into a uniform. Give examples. Yeah? And finally, experimenter bias. Most of you talked about this in your mock paper recently. Another major criticism of Zimbardo is the fact that he took part in the research himself. We refer to this as experimenter bias or investigator effects. But expand your point, otherwise you're just not going to get the marks. Why is that a problem? Because participants may have behaved in a way that is consistent with the study aims, rather than us seeing true conformity to social roles. I.e., we might just be seeing people following orders and acting in a certain way, accepting a role, rather than true conformity. Notice, as a final point, there are two very clear-cut ethical critiques here. They are independent, they count as two separate critiques, but make sure you make the difference clear with supporting examples. And that is everything you need to know about conformity. Run if you need to. Oh, thank you. Run if you need to. I will